So enough of me telling you all about me. I want to welcome all the way from the UK to the rest of the world, Mr. Terry Farley and Pete Heller. Thank you, fellas, for coming on. As we always know. Thank
Hello.
you. Is everyone okay? Everyone relaxed because everybody's coming in and they're coming in droves and sharing the show, thankfully. So, as everybody knows, I'll put the question out first and I'll let either one of you start. Okay? So you're both young kids. How does music find the both of you? Whoever wants to take it first, by all means.
Well, Terry, you okay. Well, music was just part of the background of my life, really, because I'm the youngest of quite a big family. 6 kids in my family, so I'm the youngest. I was born in the middle of the 60s. I grew up with just music constantly on in the background, just, you know, the usual stuff, all the chart stuff, and Beatles, Rolling Stones. And then by the time the 70s were underway, I was like listening to, you know, my sister was mad into Led Zeppelin and the rest of it, David Bowie. So yeah, I just was constantly listening to those sounds and processing them. And my dad was a big jazz fan, big band and boogie woogie, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so that was really my thing. And as I grew up in the 80s, we were just kind of flooded and overwhelmed by the music and that was around the time, because it was such a musical culture. Britain, you know, Top of the Pops every week, all the chart stuff, listening to Radio 1. You couldn't really get away from it rather. So I was always listening and always being inspired by music.
Mr. Terry,
your journey.
Pretty much same. I mean, you know, my mum used to buy records, Motown records. Tamla Motown. When I was a little kid, Tamla Motown was the pop music. It was, everyone listened to Tamla Motown. As a little kid, I must be really, she used to sort of like play the records upstairs in her bedroom, teach me dances, you know, teach me how to dance. And she used to always say, don't tell your dad, because, you know, sort of like little boys being taught how to dance was a little bit effeminate, I guess. So I was learning all these little moves, kind of odd moves. And then it was just kind of what you did, really. You know, you had, growing up where the area I grew up in, you had reggae, you had soul, and that was it. You know, people weren't into anything else, and buying records was a thing that I did from, you know, I remember the first record that I ever bought. My mum gave me some money and she said, oh, do you want to buy it? You know, and so we went to Shepherd's Bush Market and I bought a record called Bonnie and Clyde by Georgie Fame. Do you know that record?
No, I'm not sure.
Georgie Fame, Bonnie and Clyde. It was like #1, and it was the song. It was the story about Bonnie and Clyde, and it had sound effects in it where they got shot and they all got killed. It had the car screeching and, you know, and the police stopping them. And Georgie Fame was a really English jazz musician. Very, you know, used to, when the American acts would come to England, like that, he would always be the guy on the organ backing them. And that was kind of like my entry, and, you know, and it was just exciting. But I liked going into record shops. You know, I'd look at people in the record shop, older boys or men, and you kind of see these different characters, and the culture of a record shop I found really interesting, especially reggae culture, where, you know, no one spoke in the shop, no one let anyone else know what they were buying. you know, their little pile of records, and they would just nod when he played a record. And at the end of an hour, they would just tally it up. And I like that culture. I really like, you know, to this day, although I don't buy vinyl anymore, you know, I really do the whole culture around it.
Ah, okay. So we're going to say now, because I do remember the movie Bonnie and Clyde, but I don't remember the song for whatever reason. But I do.
So it was #1 in England. It was a #1 record. When we finish here, we've been just put Bonnie and Clyde. It's a great record. I mean, it's a novelty record, novelty gangster record. It's a great record.
Okay, so up until you guys meet, I'm assuming, because I've always read over the years you were big into Jamaican reggae. I know that you love reggae music. So what was the premise of going on in London? What was the sound in the 70s, or, you know, as you guys were growing up? You got to paint a picture a little bit for everybody. What was happening before this house music thing happened and before you guys got together?
Probably too young in the 70s to go clubbing. I mean, you know, the places that we went to were playing pretty much the same music as what, you know, Larry Levan was playing at the Paradise Garage, bar a few of the really overtly disco records, you know, and in England, the kind of what you would call the underground tended to like a lot of the jazz stuff as well. You know, New York City, Miroslav Vitruvius and Jaws, stuff like that. Lalo Schifrin, Life on Mars.
Dexter Wansel, yep.
That kind of jazz disco was huge in London and in other parts of the country. So that's what kind of hooked me, and I was buying them records. And then one day, we used to go to a club called Skindles, and there was a DJ there called Alan Southern, who now lives in America. And he was played brilliant music. And he was 5, 6, 7 years older than us. And he was one of the tough guys at Chelsea. So everyone looked up to him, you know, all the kids looked up to him, the dancers and the tougher kids. And we just kind of got really into it like that. And around 1981, me and my friend Paul McKee decided we were going to do a Skindles revival. Now, this club had only been shut 2-3 years. So like the idea of doing a revival night, where he would play, we'd get Alan and he would play, you know, Francine McGee, Delirium. He would play Linda Clifford, Runaway Love. And we thought we'd have about 100 people come, our friends, and we sold it out. I mean, we never promoted before. We had like 500 people in there. And I remember going home and throwing the money, all cash, throwing the money up on my bed, on my mattress, and screaming. And I bought an airline ticket to America with the money.
You did?
There was a budget airline called Freddie Laker, this Australian airline, and they started flights for 100.
It's a British airline.
No, Freddie Laker.
He was Australian, but he was living in this country, and it was a British airline. Laker Airways.
They all fucked him off in the end, didn't they? They all got together and did a deal on him. But I remember me and my wife, we come to New York on the money that I had kind of got through DJing and promoting for the first time, and it kind of like, oh, this is good. I need to do this more often, and yeah. So that was kind of it for me.
Wait a minute, wait, hang on. So did you come into New York and go like everybody else did? Run to Studio 54, go to the Paradise Garage? Did you go to any of the clubs? Anything?
I tell you what, we didn't in 1979, 1980. You know, I was a teenager. We didn't know about the Paradise Garage. You know, there was no magazines that wrote about that. There was no internet. There was no radio shows that, you know, had Larry Levan playing. We just didn't know. And you know, later on in the 80s, you'd get tapes. You know, people would buy tapes of Tony Humphrey's show and tapes of Larry Levan. But that come much later. You know, when we went to New York, it was about the same time as that film come out with Charles Bronson. What was that film? You know, where he was going killing muggers in Central Park. You know that Charles Bronson film?
Yes, I do, but I can't think of the name of it.
He was like a vigilante, but he was deliberately putting himself. So like, you can't go to Central Park, you can't go here, you can't go there. The same. So we was in New York 3 nights. I didn't want to go Studio 54 because I knew it'd be full of wankers and it'd be some club, which we had in England, and I didn't like anyway. I didn't know about the Paradise Garage, but I wouldn't have got in anyway. You know, my friend who I did this party with, I'm telling you, Paul McKee, he come to New York. You know the famous picture of the ramp where everyone queuing up at the Paradise Garage?
Yeah,
he took that picture, right? Now he got to the front door and he was working A&R for London Records, and I think they had a record out that was really big at the Paradise Garage, and maybe one of their acts had played there, and I think they got him on the guest list, but they wouldn't let him in. You know, he wasn't a member, and he was with his girlfriend, so he wasn't gay. He was white, and he had to. I think he had to sort of pull some big names up from where he was working to get in. But he took that picture on the ramp, and he took a couple of other little snaps inside. But no, we didn't do anything like that. To be honest with you, it was overwhelming as it was. You know, seeing people. New York in 81 Manhattan was quite a shock.
I bet. Coming from England, yeah, I bet it was a shock.
Yeah, people.
Well, here's a question. Here's the question first. You know that movie everybody sees? All you guys love that movie from '79, New York Warriors, the Warriors, whatever that movie is, because every English guy asks me that question. Was it what the Warriors were? Did it look like it? Did it smell like it? Was it exactly what you guys seen on that movie? Because all of you had this idea New York was like this. Was it exactly that way when you came?
No. It wasn't loads of gangs wandering around, but it was pretty rough. So I actually went there in 1981 because we also got a flight to New York in 1981 on Laker Airways. But we were staying with my family, my dad, they did a house swap with so you could do that. You could like get these directories of people who bought your house on the summer holiday, and we swapped with his family in upstate New York, out just outside the city, a place called Larchmont. And my sister at the time, she was a nurse in New Rochelle, so we came out to see her really. But we were there for 2 weeks, and it was just after the royal wedding when Princess Di got married to Charles, and so it was just all over the press. And but we went into Manhattan a few times, but it was the trains were all covered in graffiti. You went into Times Square at night, it was just hookers everywhere. So it was a bit more like Midnight Cowboy than the Warriors, but yeah, it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough. I remember going downtown as well, like down, you know, that where all and just the warehouses. There was nothing there at all. Just yeah, there was no sort of shops and restaurants and all that stuff, but it was great. It was, you know, it was the real thing, the real deal. You knew there was a buzz about the place. There was a real energy, and you could feel it.
The same trip that we made, we had a short stay in New York, and then we went to Miami, and I was determined to go to a concert in Miami. So we looked at the newspaper, and there was Solar Records showcase. So we went to see the Whispers, Shalimar, and another group who I can't, Lakeside.
Possibly a Fantastic Voyage. That'd be right. Yep.
Yeah, Lakeside, and of course, you know, so it was like, where is this on? So we went to this place to buy the tickets, and I remember we went in there, and the woman was going, it's soul and funk. Yes, yes, that's what we like. Where are you from? England. Right. Are you sure? Yes, yes, we like this. And it was quite strange because, you know, we used to go to a lot of concerts in England, and you would go and see, you know, James Brown, Funkadelic, Sylvester, and the audiences would be very mixed, very racially mixed. And we went in this, and we were in an arena, I guess like a basketball arena, and we were sitting there, and I think we were probably the only two white couples there, and everyone else was dressed up. This was the other thing, you know, just jeans and t-shirts. Everyone was in suits, and all the ladies had big hairs, and you know, and I was like, what the fuck, you know. But that was cool. That was cool. We, you know, I'm glad we did that, but we never went clubbing. No.
All right, but look, you know what? That's why the woman kept asking you, are you sure you want to go? Because all of you don't realize in those days how segregated America was. It was incredible. Yeah. Especially down south. Woof.
Florida, yeah. Yeah.
They're looking at you guys going, are you sure you like that music? Are you positive you like that music? You're like, yeah, we know what that music is. Because you didn't deal with that in England. That's why Jimi Hendrix went over there. He didn't have none of the problems he had here. Things were much more relaxed in your country to go and be, you know, of another color and be comfortable and relaxed to do what you do and enjoy playing at a spot and not have a problem with a police officer, including in the early 80s. It was still going on.
I mean, Pete will back me up on this. The time was when we come to Chicago with Loleatta. You know, we had a couple of situations in restaurants that, you know, were quite offensive, really.
Hold on, wait. Hang on, wait. We have to explain what happened there because you said Loleatta. I mentioned it before. So before we get to the Loleatta part, I want to know how you guys got together. That's a very important part to the story. Because I haven't heard, I know both of you are coming to New York separately. When does Farley meet Heller? And then we'll get to that.
There's quite a lot of time after that. I mean, I was 15, I think, when I was in New York the first time. So after that, I was I went to university. My sort of journey towards where Terry was through hip hop and early. It was called electro, really. That was the thing that got me. I think actually, there was a lot of music, and when I was going to a lot of gigs. One kind of really formative experience was going to see the Clash play at Brixton, and they had I think it was Fab Five Freddy, and he was the sort of support act, and one of his DJs was just playing beforehand, and this is kind of what I guess we're talking again, not much later than this, probably 84, something like that, and 83. So his DJ was just, well, he may even be himself, just playing hip hop. Or electro, or electro funk it was called at the time, and it was just I'd heard bits and pieces, but it was just like I remember just sitting there and listening to this sound and thinking, this is it, this is what I want, and that was kind of like my journey in the more sort of underground black music was kind of then, really. That's how I suddenly sort of transformed my what I wanted to do, and so I went off to university shortly afterwards. And I was running clubs, small clubs, some parties up there in Manchester before the whole acid house thing, and then acid house kind of movement that started in 1988, which is the year I left Manchester and came down to London, and it was the clubs in London where we ended up meeting up.
Oh, really? This is like 87, 88 already now that you guys met. Right around that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think probably 1988. You know, I met Pete at Shoom. Pete. My first memory is Pete actually playing a guitar over Danny Rampling's records. But I also do what I kind of always, I was thinking about this the other day. Fondly, Peter had a kind of intro whenever he played him. He would warm up. He would play the a cappella of First Choice, Love and Happiness, with the little Rhodes solo in Love and Happiness, and then he would sort of like, you know, start playing records. And he always did play a lot of this is you know, on a house scene. He'd play a lot of records that I used to really like from the disco era. He would play Whistle Bump, Diodato, T-Connection, Midnight. So I think that's the first time we kind of would have like sort of been in each other's company.
Yeah, so well, probably we would have been in each other's company actually at the fitness centre. So Shoom was a club run by Danny Rampling and his wife Jenny, and they and it was in a very small venue. It was basically a gym. That's why it's called the fitness centre in the week, and then on Saturdays they sort of pushed all the gym equipment to one side, hung up a big banner and stuck Norman Jay's brother had a sound system that was actually a reggae system, and they put it in temporarily and then put a smoke machine and a strobe in the corner, and that was basically the club. And had a little bar and some stairs downstairs, and it sort of become a bit of a legend amongst clubs because it was quite difficult to get into eventually, and it didn't hold many people, but it was very intense. And so we probably would have been in that room together, but not aware of each other at the time. And Shoom eventually moved out of that venue to a bigger place. So it went to a place at the time called, what was the name of the place at the time? Busby's, which became a story too. And Busby's, that's where I got to know Danny sort of quite well in the sort of downtime. But after the fitness centre closed down, there was sort of a hiatus. There was about a few months where nothing was going on. We were just travelling around London to all the other clubs. But Danny opened it there, and he asked me to be the warm-up DJ, which was a bit of a shock at the time because I was pretty well unknown. I didn't, you know, and I was quite young, didn't have a huge record collection, but we kind of bonded. So that was kind of my break, and I would play the warm-up downstairs just before Danny came on, and then Terry would be upstairs with Andy Weatherall playing a kind of real mixture of all sorts of sort of Balearic, which as it was known at the time, and then sort of reggae and dub and all sorts of other weird things, so funk and soul. So yeah, I was really there just to warm up for Danny. So that's why I would start off quite slow and just generally build the vibe as people came into the club. But yeah.
How long did that last for you being the resident warm-up guy for Terry? Not for Terry, for Rampling, for Danny.
For Danny, well, for Busby's, I think it was about a year was it open there, or a year and a half, something like that. Eventually we moved to another venue. They stopped doing that. It was a Wednesday night, and they closed, and they moved to another venue called the Park, which is over in West London. That was yeah, and then it was just guest DJs that shared with Terry, which actually where I played guitar was actually there, so I don't think you sort of slightly mixed the times up, but yeah, there was the part where I played.
It's very hard to kind of, you know, actually do a timeline because it, you know, weeks went into weeks and years went into
I think the guitar thing was definitely, I think what happened is we kind of connected through going, you know, meeting up and at various different nights and going to Ibiza. I remember you that opening night at Amnesia, where we sort of, I remember chatting to you then, and then the Park thing, and then I was playing guitar, and that was when you started up the label, and that was when you needed someone who could play or do stuff for the first Boca Juniors record, and that's kind of how we started.
I mean, Pete told me he had a drum machine. You had a, didn't you? You had a little.
I had a drum machine, and they weren't mine though. They were basically, I borrowed a bunch of equipment from Richard Norris, who's sort of in the Grid. He's quite well known artist.
Yes, I remember.
And he
wow. Yeah, I remember the Grid. Wow.
And I was friendly with him at the time, and I hung out with him in the studio. And he had a sampler called like his old Casio FZ1, the little 12-bit sampler keyboard, and a couple of other bits and bobs. And I was like, oh, can I borrow them? And so I'd learned to program a bit on this little Alesis hardware programmer, and I'd had it sort of in my room in Camden Town in my flat, and I'd been sort of playing old go-go records and stuff. So then that sort of became the sort of backbone of our first track that we worked on together, which is this track that we did with Andy Weatherall. It was Boca Juniors, and it was called Rays, and it was sort of like my sort of sample beats and my rather failed attempt at being a guitarist. But yeah, that was basically the start of that. Me and Terry really working together, because after that, Terry had started working with a band called The Farm, and he wanted a bit of support really, because he felt, I think you felt a bit lacking in confidence.
I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I was prepared to twiddle knobs. I just thought, oh, I'll get in there. I'll press a few buttons, and and we were very lucky, because the first record we got to work on was this record by a band called The Farm, who Terry was friends with from Liverpool, and they did a record called All Together Now, which became a big hit, and we were on producer points for that. And we co-produced that with Suggs from Madness, and that was the first record they recorded on the album. And I think Suggs realised quite quickly that we were absolutely of no use whatsoever in the studio, and got and got rid of us quite quick, but not before we got our producer point on All Together Now, and that.
So wait. So would you say that was like the beginnings of how we're going to figure out how to do this? Like, we got to step up our game. We got to learn something. What was the?
Well, it was a bit like that. It was more than that. It was here's a check for 15 grand, which is what came my way quite soon after that, because it was a big hit. And so I was like, well, I've got some money, so let's buy. I bought a computer. I bought a load of gear, and I was like, I'll learn how to use it now. So that really became the basis of all the records we made, because we had some equipment, so I could figure out how to use it at home. And then it was just, whenever we went into the studio, we didn't have to rely on at the time you get, if you did a remix, you got sent into a studio with an engineer and usually a sort of programmer, and you'd have to try and explain to them what you meant. But whereas now we could do it ourselves, which is what, that's why things were. I mean, it was difficult as well in those days. Computers and equipment was quite expensive, so it wasn't as simple as just having your laptop like it is now. If you wanted that gear, if you wanted all that equipment, you had to spend a fair bit of money. So if you didn't have a record deal, you needed access to a bit of cash. And we were quite young. I was quite young. Terry was, wasn't like, we didn't get a big advance or anything. We weren't a band. So, and we were being asked to do lots of remixes. So it was just sort of, we were learning on the job, really.
So that one record basically launched it for you guys, and that got everyone to know who you were instantly, right?
Well, it gave us the tools to start working out how to do it properly.
Interesting. See, I had no idea. See, here's where I'm stumped over. I didn't even know you played guitar, bro.
Well, I didn't really. I could play a few riffs.
I was like a guitar player? Like, I didn't know that. I'm like, this is really cool. Now, here's the thing. Terry, were you, because you're coming up in the 80s, you're DJing. Were you doing this full time, or were you doing something else as well before the record label started?
No, I was a gas fitter.
Really?
Yeah, I was a gas fitter. And I was changing, like the gas meter you have in a house. I was working with Sue's cousin, who had this contract with the gas board for changing and putting in new meters. Quite frankly, it was a right doddle, and I liked it. I mean, it was really easy. It was the quintessential kind of working class life in the 80s, where you were dodging everything. People would start at work at 8, they would go to the cafe, you'd be in the cafe for an hour. Then you'd have this little scam where you go back to the depot because you didn't have the right part. Then you'd go and do a couple of jobs. You'd be in the pub at lunchtime.
Yeah.
I didn't drink. I used to play Space Invaders, but the older guys, they were drinking pints and pints at lunchtime. And then after that, you would do a couple of jobs, and you'd be home at 3 o'clock. It was quite, it was quite easy, but here's the thing. Paul, I'd been working with a crew called the Raid Club, the Raid. And this was like 86, 87. And the 3 DJs were me, I was the warm-up, Paul Oakenfold and Pete Tong. And the Raid was run by Gary Haseman, who, God bless his soul, he made Acid, that record, D-Mob, and another guy called Paul Starsky. And it was brilliant, it was really good. The music was go-go, early house, a lot of kind of New York, big New York D-Train type records. The crowd was great, very trendy, really cool, loads of girls. We did warehouse parties, we did the WAG Club, we did an all-nighter at the 100 Club.
Did a circus tent in Hyde Park, I seem to remember.
Battersea Park.
Battersea Park, that's right. I was there that night.
That was New Year's Eve, yeah. I mean, yeah, you played, didn't you?
No, I was before my DJing days. That was
Norman J played.
That's Norman J played. That's it.
Norman J played. Fat Tony played, and you had to go.
Wow.
Basically, Haseman had gone in because they had the circus up all week for 2 weeks with all the elephants and everything, and he had gone in there. And what time do you close New Year's Eve? Right? Can we do a party here afterwards? And I think bunged someone some money. And then we had to go in and we had to climb up the pole where, the trapeze artists would go. And they'd put the decks up the top. And he was climbing up this ladder and it was really scary. But it was very posh around there. And I think we only lasted till maybe just after midnight when the police raided it and shut it down. I mean, very apt. It was called the Raid, because they were kind of illegal parties. So that never lasted very long. But my point is, Paul Oakenfold then asked me to be resident at a new club that they were starting called Spectrum at Heaven on a Monday. And I'll give you 50 quid. And I was like, oh, that's not bad. I'm probably only getting 100 quid a week, doing what I was doing. And then that went crazy. And then on the Thursday, him and Nancy Noyes, Paul Oakenfold and Nancy Noyes, had been the residents at this club called Future, which was a really, really cool kind of Balearic party for all the kids who had been living in Ibiza and who had nowhere to go, once they're back into London. And he said, would you be resident? I'll give you £100 a week. And I was like, my goodness, £100 a week, which was what I was earning 7 days, 5 days a week on a normal job. And I tried to do both, but it was just too much. I was getting indoors at 4 and I was up at 6 to work.
Oh God, so you only had 2 hours to pull it together and start again.
And I mean, while work, as I explained to you what work was, I was still working with gas.
Yeah.
So there was a danger to the people I was going into their houses. I was putting people's lives in danger. So I had a chat with my girlfriend, and she said, give it a year, pack your job in, give it a year, and see how the DJing goes.
Did you really dream that you were going to become a DJ and do this, or it just was like, I'm throwing in the pool, I'm just going to jump in the pool and try it? I don't know if that's going to go.
There wasn't a career in DJing before Acid House. Even I think the people who were DJs, their goal in life was to get a job in a dance department at a major record label.
Or on the radio.
That's right. Radio presenters.
Yeah, that's what they wanted, and a lot of people did. Oki was doing Def Jam. Johnny Walker was at London. Nancy had a job. That was the goal, not to be a DJ. The DJing was fun, but it was a way of getting a job in the industry. You know, nowadays it's the biggest job in the industry.
Yeah, but back then, Ian Levine started in the North, like, for example, and look where he went to, and all those names from the 80s, 70s, and 80s. They weren't thinking about DJing as we're going to take this international, we're going to be big superstars. They were thinking about, I want to make a record, and I want to produce, and how do I get in? I want to do something else. According to some of them very rich that we know, we should say were born with some golden spoons. They weren't worried about money. They were able to play around and then go into it. Where some of us were grafters, as you would call it in England, coming from nothing, you know, from the soil and working our way up to the ranks. So officially I got where Pete meets you and all that. When does this production team officialize and the Junior Boy Zone blows up? And because I know when you guys came to New York, that I remember Sound Factory, you were hanging out. We knew you were in town. But what happened pre to that? When did the office open up? When did this all become legitimized?
Well, I mean, I already sort of mentioned Boca Juniors, and that was the first record on a new label that that somehow one of the Boys Own, I think it itself. Terry can tell you a bit more about the background, but there were, you know, you four friends from West London-ish, and a deal somehow was hatched with the Pete Tong, who was at the time at FFRR in London, for Boys Own, like to make records, and we were sort of. I was drafted in to help, as I've already mentioned, and we spent a week at a very expensive record label a record studio in Acton called Eden, and must have cost a fortune. But we basically produced a record called Raise, and that was really the start. And that sort of kept going for a little while, but it never really evolved into anything particularly successful. And I think we got frustrated with the major label pace of things, because it was quite slow and you had to take your place in the queue, and eventually we were like, well, let's do something, you know, a bit more underground that's a bit faster, and then independent label was born out of that, which was Junior Boys Own, and there was a need to make records, and so you know, we were basically people who went into studios for a couple of days and knocked out records, as well as the remixes that started at that case.
The first kind of house record we made was Beating the Bones, which was Fire Island, wasn't it? Fire Island, Beating Your Bones?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So I think we kind of just, you know, one of the few things I'm good at, and there is only a few, is making up names and kind of throwing ideas in. So we kind of we agreed on Fire Island. We thought that was a great name. And Beating Your Bones, I was saying to you about the Tony Humphries tapes, that especially in Ladbroke Grove, people in Ladbroke Grove used to be crazy about Tony Humphries. There was a New Jersey Appreciation Society, which was like all these guys in Ladbroke Grove, you know, and they were the New Jersey Appreciation Society. Anyway, and one of these tapes was on Tony Humphries on Kiss FM, was a jingle. And he just went, and the jingle went, Tony Humphries, putting the beat in your bones. And it was like, Pete, we got to make a record called Beat in the Bones. So Pete knew a rapper.
No, I don't know where he came from, that guy, but he turned out to be the nephew of the lead singer of Killing Joke, who were quite a big band around at the time. But he was a kind of rapper. I don't know where he came from, though. I don't think I knew him. Or maybe I did. I can't remember.
JC001.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Was he not from the gay scene?
No. He was, like I said, he was related to what's his name? The lead singer from Killing Joke. I can't remember his name anyway. But Jazz, I think wasn't it? Anyway, yeah, he came down the studio. We knocked up a little beat. Got him rapping, sampled a load of stuff he'd done, and I plinked away at the keyboards, and a track was done, and a dub. We always did a dub and a track, and that was the first record on